Hello, Dan-Dwayne here. Today I just want to talk a little bit about writing, particularly adding suspense into your story. I write mystery and suspense stories, mostly adventures, but there's a lot of suspense in my stories. And I think no matter what your genre, you should have suspense in your stories. So let's just discuss for a little bit about how to add suspense into your story. We'll start by just talking about what is suspense. I like to talk about that as if suspense is like blowing up little bubbles. You know, the soap bubbles, you dip in the soap and you blow through the little hoop and it fills the area with these little bubbles. Well, you want to inflate the entire sky with as much bubbles as you can, as many as you can get out there. You just spend time just dipping and blowing and dipping and blowing and waving around your little hoop until you just fill the sky with bubbles after bubbles. Well, that's adding tension and suspense to your story. It's just like that. You work hard at filling the air. It's really difficult sometimes to fill the entire air with a little hoop blowing bubbles. And what you're doing is each little bubble has a delicate little surface that if you touch it the wrong way, it pops, because it has this great tension that's suspended between the air pressure inside and outside of the bubble. That's the kind of tension you want to build up in your story. Something that is delicate, it's a nuance, but it's real. So you ask me how to add suspense to your story? Add more bubbles. Just keep waving your little hoop around until you just fill the air with them. Well, how do I do that? Well, let's talk about it. The fewer mistakes perhaps that you make, the better the flow in the reading, and the fewer distractions. And the fewer distractions you have, the more intact your little bubbles of tension are going to be, because nothing distracts or pops your bubbles. All right, how to build it. What creates the tension between the inside air of the bubble and the outside air of the bubble that sustains the little soap surface? We call tension. It's what your character desires. First, you have to identify this. Does your character desire love, freedom, adventure, forgiveness? What is it that your character desires? What is it that they want? And then keep them from getting that. Don't let them have it. Whatever it is, make some terrible consequence that you have as a result of them getting it, that keeps them from possessing it. And whatever your genre, show that this terrible thing is about to happen. Then postpone the resolution to sustain the suspense. So something awful is going to happen, and you're putting it off. And the longer you put it off, the more suspense you're going to build. So you're waving your little hoop and making bubbles, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And the longer you wait, and the more problems this person encounters between fulfilling his desire or the objective of your story, and you just keep waving your wand and making bubbles. The more, and the more, until the reader can hardly stand it. And you have really built suspense by refusing to give what your character needs or desires. You just keep putting something in their way, putting something between them and their success. That's one way of building your tension. But now let's talk about sex scenes. Everyone, and I mean everyone, who's seen a PG-13 movie knows what a sex scene is. There's the PG-13 way to handle the sex scene, and then there's the R and M rated versions. The thing is that when you're talking about suspense, the results of it is all the same. You see, Adding a sex scene to your story is actually counterintuitive to building suspense. During your story, you have built tension. Fill the sky with bubbles, and then in only a few paragraphs, you let the bubbles burst. The tension's gone, and yes, a scene of lovemaking bursts the bubbles, and the fragile tension that you have built is all released. It's like you've cleared the air, and we can see the horizon without suspense in the way. The suspense, you want to be there. So, remember, if you want to titillate your audience, add sex. But if you want to build suspense, postpone it. Okay, now let's talk about promises. You see, a good writer promises things to the reader. Suspense happens in the stillness of the story. It's in the gaps between the action sequences and the movements between the promises of something dreadful that's about to happen and when it actually arrives. In my story, Midnight in New Orleans, Alexis, this is a scene that was cut from that story. It didn't make it in. It's still a good scene. I'm going to read it. Alexis shivered at the sound, a repetitive thump in the stillness of the pitch-dark room. Louder, closer it came toward her. Promises are not always stated in words. Here the intruder didn't come right out and say he was going to kill Alexis, but it was implied. And suspense is not always about intruders in the dark. Stories can be comedic, romantic, horrific, or dramatic, and all of them suspenseful. For example, two lovers plan to meet at the top of the Empire State Building to elope. This is an affair to remember. That's a promise. That is suspense. Granted, it's not intense, but it is suspense. Packing everything into a tight time frame also helps. Set a time limit to the hero's success. Give the impression that there is a countdown underway, and the hero may not resolve the problem in time. No action is happening in the story, then no promises are being made. A slow chapter can be tricked up by making promises to the reader of upcoming action or adventure. Suspense actually equals apprehension. The problem of readers being bored isn't solved by adding action, but instead you need to add apprehension. Don't ask what needs to happen. Ask what I can promise that will go wrong. Remember to keep all those things between your hero and their goal. What promise can you make that you want to give to the hero and then make everything go wrong? That's apprehension, and it brings suspense. Don't make your story a report of events. People turn on the news for that kind of story. Great stories they're really about transformations. Don't tell the reader where things are going. Have the main character take the reader by the hand and let him live it through their eyes, hear it through their ears. It's a show. Don't tell. Now, don't disappoint your readers. If you're making promises, which we all do as writers, we all have to make promises. We all do this to build suspense and to carry on the flow of the story. But a disappointment is defined by huge promises without fulfillment. To achieve suspense, the reader must believe that the resolution is going to happen. If the resolution is not going to happen, then the reader gets bored with it. The suspense is too great. They just want to fold it up and set it aside. Can't take that. We have to see a resolution and then build some more suspense. It may not be a complete resolution, but it partially leads us to where we're going. It may not clear the whole sky. There may be still tension between the two characters. There still may be tension between the leader and the second in command. There may still be a tension between the lovers, but some resolution has taken place, and so it gives us hope that more resolution will take place as we go on. Don't leave any promises unresolved in the end. Tie up all your loose ends and loose threads. Now, every scene should be a promise to the reader about the significance of the character's interaction. It may relate to the subplot or the story arc as a whole. This is where many writers fumble the ball. If you spend 3 paragraphs describing a woman's crimson-colored sweater, or that sweater better be pretty vital to the story. If not, you're telling your readers, by the way, I wasted your time. Yeah, that part really wasn't important, but I made you read it anyway. It takes the reader's time and then translates into, this wasn't important. Maybe the next part isn't either. Not good. Perhaps those 3 paragraphs should be reduced to a line, like I used in Midnight in New Orleans. It was a description of Mambo Bedreau. She was the fortune teller. Mambo Bedreau, a large woman with dark skin, her hair a mass of dreadlocks, pressed together under a bright yellow scarf, which she wrapped into a turban, and she wore a red sweater over a mismatched common print dress laden with excessive jewelry. One sentence, and you get all that you need to know about what she looks like. She even jingles when she walks because of all the jewelry that she has. You can see her and hear her. You know more about her than simply the fact that she is wearing this red sweater. Now, this section may be a bit long. The definition of a bad story is when a story fails the reader. And let's talk about how to fail the reader so you won't go down that path. It's often because a writer didn't make big enough promises or didn't fulfill them at the right time. You see, a satisfying story gives the reader the right amount of wait time before fulfilling the promise, but broken promises by the author is never fulfilling. If you feel like it's time to come to some resolution so you can carry on with the rest of the tension, then do so. It helps like a ladder. It steps them up one step, and the reader moves one step closer and one step closer. But if you keep them completely away from their goal, completely away from any success, they're still at the bottom of the ladder. They'll look up at the ladder and go, it's just too high. I can't finish this. And the book gets put down. How can a writer break a promise to his reader? Well, let's explore a scene. The story starts with a woman running barefoot in the woods. She's pursued by a man who cocks his shotgun and considers her his prey. Then the story flashes back to the morning before he leads back to that point in time. We see a lot of these kinds of setups in Hollywood movies. We have spent the entire book up to one point biting our nails to see what happened to the woman. If the woman is simply shot and killed by her stalker, then the reader is let down. That's a big fail. There is an unspoken promise of some exciting twist, some excitement to every story. It's part of our culture. Now, the scene I described is in my short story, Murder at 421 Sierra Glen Drive. That's my story that came out of. Ever since Capote wrote In Cold Blood, the American readers are not satisfied with the average. It changed how writers write and readers read books. The mundane is not acceptable. Something unexpected must happen. And by the way, Capote never finished another book after that. As a writer, you're competing with every writer who ever penned a novel for the reader's attention. It's the way of it. You will be in competition with everyone. Okay, number 6, in the points that I'm bringing out. Let the characters speak for themselves. Use the narrator only when absolutely necessary. Does the narrator need to set up the scene? Yes, probably. But then hand it off to the characters to finish the scene. Maybe they don't really talk that much, and there's a lot of action going on. Well, then the narrator has a reason for being there. But if there's any way that the characters can tell you what's going on by what they're doing and saying, that's the best way to do it. We're going to pick up with this reading where the characters are learning about a seance. Now, this is from my story, Midnight in New Orleans. It is dialogue driven, and we will get a lot of information without the use of a narrator. Here we go. "You know they never caught his killer," Monica announced as she locked arms with Alexis. "We're invited to a seance to talk to old Tom's ghost and ask him where he hid his money. Charles and Eric have convinced Mambo Boudreau to be the medium." Alexis laughed. "That sounds like something those crazy guys would do." "You guys come along. It'll be fun," Monica begged. In a rash moment, she completely ignored her mother's instructions to be in by midnight and said, "Of course we'll go. This will be a blast." Michael leaned over and asked, "Who is this Mambo Boudreau everyone besides me seems to know?" Alexis answered, "She's the Mambo priestess of Bourbon Street." He stood with a blank expression on his face. "Michael, she is the one and only voodoo queen of New Orleans. Everyone knows of her. She's a legend here. I'd go for no other reason than to get bragging rights to say I've met the woman." "The seance is to be held in Eric's old family home," Monica explained. "Meet us there at 11:30. The idea here is to imitate real life. We don't have to have a narrator chasing us around. Our characters can do so much more without the omnipotent help. Okay, now we're going to go to number 7 in my list, which is cut down the violence. If there's violence around every corner, you acclimate the reader to it, and it just becomes commonplace. Then when you want to shock them with it at the end, you can't. Don't confuse violence with suspense. Murder is not suspense. An abduction with the threat of murder, now that's suspense. And most of the time, a scene of violence is when you let the air out of all the bubbles. You pop everything. Violence is a release of tension, not a building up of tension. This makes violence the opposite of suspense. There's 4 rules I really want to bring out. Rule number 1, stay one step ahead of your reader by using whatever that you have to do. Whatever tactic, whatever red herring you have to throw in the way, stay one step ahead of your reader so that your reader cannot anticipate what your actual goal in the story may be, what's really going to fall ahead of your characters. Rule number 2, play off your reader's fears. The human condition dictates that we have similar fears: falling, heights, being eaten by sharks. All these are common and rational fears. Use them. Rule number 2, always put the setting of the climax someplace already described in the story. This keeps you from having to describe the setting at the same time that you are creating this critical epiphany for the story. Number 3, create a countdown to pressure the tension. Limit the amount of time the hero has, and you put the pressure cooker on, and the tension goes up. Number 4, have your main character, the hero, invest in the outcome. If a person is in danger, make it somebody important to them. Their son, their lover, their mother, someone special to them, so that they can have a personal investment in saving this person. Well, I hope that helps and gives you some ideas on how to put suspense into your story. I'm hoping that you are writing the next American bestseller.